Right now, there are couples in their late 60s who open a retirement statement and see the number they dreamed about for decades: $1 million in a 401k. They breathe out, convinced the hard part is finally over. Then the letters arrive. Higher Medicare premiums than they expected, a surprise tax bill, a notice about required minimum distributions they never asked for. That million they thought was theirs turns out to be a joint account with the IRS and the healthcare system. They did everything right, so why do they suddenly feel punished for saving? How did tax-deferred quietly become tax-trapped? Retirement planning in America has been built around one simple promise: pay less tax now, deal with the rest later. For most workers, that promise has a name: tax-deferred accounts. Traditional 401s and traditional IER allow contributions to go in before tax. Every dollar reduces taxable income in the year it is earned. The money then grows without yearly taxation on interest, dividends, or capital gains. The catch, which often hides in fine print, is that every dollar coming out in retirement is taxed as ordinary income. The tax is not avoided, it is postponed, and the bill arrives on the government's schedule, not the retirees. Alongside these pre-tax accounts are their mirror image, Roth accounts. With Roth IRAs and Roth 401ks, there is no deduction up front. Contributions are made with after-tax dollars, but qualified withdrawals in retirement are tax-free. In theory, a balanced strategy uses both: some money for a deduction today, some for flexibility tomorrow. In practice, the default for decades has been overwhelmingly pre-tax. Employers auto-enrolled people into traditional 401s, Ks. Max your 401k became the mantra. Almost no one was shown a simple future tax map of what those dollars would look like at 65, 70, or 75. Layered on top of these accounts are three critical systems that define retirement income in the United States: Social Security, Medicare, and the required minimum distribution rules. Social Security benefits are not always tax-free. Once a retiree's combined income crosses specific thresholds, up to 50% and then up to 85% of the benefit becomes taxable. Medicare, which most people join at 65, has base premiums for Part B and Part D, but also IRMAA surcharges, income-related adjustments that increase those premiums when modified adjusted gross income climbs above certain brackets. And then there are required minimum distributions. At a set age defined by law, owners of traditional IRAs and most employer plans must begin withdrawing a minimum percentage of their pre-tax balance each year. That percentage rises with age. The withdrawals are taxed as income, whether the retiree actually needs the cash or not. For someone who spent a career diligently stuffing money into a 401k, these rules create a peculiar future. In their 70s and 80s, they can be paid a salary they did not ask for directly from their tax-deferred accounts on top of Social Security and any other income. This mix of rules did not appear overnight. In the 1980s and 1990s, corporations shifted from traditional pensions, where companies promised a set monthly benefit, to defined contribution plans, where workers owned an account instead. Policymakers wanted to encourage saving, so they offered deductions and tax deferral. The focus was on accumulation. The message was clear: use these accounts to lower taxes today and build a larger nest egg for tomorrow. Almost nobody talked about what would happen when millions of savers hit retirement with most of their wealth trapped in pre-tax buckets, facing RMDs, Social Security taxation, and Medicare surcharges all at once. Today, that future is here. A generation that embraced tax-deferred saving is discovering what later really means. For viewers who have built most of their retirement wealth inside traditional 401s, Ks, and IRAs, this is not a theoretical discussion. It is the architecture of their future tax return. The question is no longer just how big the balance can grow. It is how that balance will interact with every other system once work stops and the government starts turning the valves. The retirement tax bomb does not start ticking at 70. It starts quietly in your 40s and 50s, during the years that are supposed to feel like peak progress. A promotion arrives, the paycheck grows, and HR slides a stack of forms across the table. At the center of everything is the traditional 401k. Contribute pre-tax, get an immediate deduction, maybe even a generous employer match. On the surface, it feels like the perfect deal. Lower taxes now, more money growing for later, and free money from the company. Auto-enrollment makes the choice even more automatic. Many workers are placed into a pre-tax 401k by default the moment they join a company. Contribution rates might start low, but every raise is a chance to bump it up. Financial magazines and online calculators repeat the same advice. If you can, max your 401k. The emotional feedback loop is powerful. Each year, the tax bill looks a little smaller than it would have. The refund is a bit higher. The account balance climbs. There is almost no immediate downside that a busy 45-year-old can feel. What rarely appears on the projection screen is the other side of the equation. Every pre-tax dollar, plus decades of growth, is a future taxable income stream. The number on the statement is not pure spending power. It is a mixture of principal gains and a silent claim from future tax brackets. When a worker in their 40s pushes more money into a pre-tax plan, they are not just saving, they are making a long-term bet that their tax rate in retirement will be lower than it is today. That assumption might be correct for some, but for high earners and aggressive savers, it often turns out to be wrong. Over time, compounding quietly does its work. A consistent saver who puts away pre-tax money for 25 or 30 years, especially with market growth and employer match, can easily cross into seven-figure territory. On paper, a $1 million pre-tax balance looks like a trophy. It represents decades of discipline, skip vacations, and early mornings. Yet no one sends a companion statement showing what that million looks like after required minimum distributions. Social Security taxation and Medicare surcharges have all taken their share. Conventional advice rarely questions this trajectory. The line, "You'll probably be in a lower tax bracket in retirement," is repeated so often it starts to sound like a fact. But what happens when a successful couple pays off their mortgage, keeps working into their late 60s, delays Social Security for higher benefits, and enters retirement with a large pre-tax portfolio? Their retirement income can rival or even exceed their peak working income once RMDs are layered on top of benefits and other sources. The assumed lower bracket never arrives. By the time many savers reach their late 50s, the structure is largely set. Most of their wealth is inside tax-deferred containers. Roth balances, if they exist at all, are small. Taxable brokerage accounts might hold only a fraction of their total net worth. The flexibility to choose which type of dollar to spend in any given year is limited. The system worked exactly as designed. It encouraged maximum use of pre-tax saving. The part that was never fully explained is that concentrating most of a lifetime's wealth inside those accounts also concentrates future tax risk. So when someone in their early 60s looks at a large pre-tax balance and thinks, "We're finally safe," the more accurate question might be different. How much of that balance will actually show up as usable income? And how much has already been earmarked by rules they have never read? And what happens when those rules begin to turn that tidy account balance into forced income, whether they are ready for it or not? The tax bomb does not explode all at once. It is triggered in stages by rules that were rarely mentioned when the money was going in. For many retirees, 3 letters and 1 acronym define the moment things start to feel different. RMD, Social Security tax, and IRMAA. Each one on its own is manageable. Together, they can quietly turn a safe balance into a constant source of unwanted income and higher taxes. The first trigger is required minimum distributions. At a government-defined age in the early 70s, owners of traditional IRAs and most employer plans lose the freedom to simply leave their pre-tax money untouched. The law requires them to withdraw at least a certain percentage every year. That percentage is based on life expectancy tables and rises as they get older. In the early years, the required amount might be in the low single digits of the account balance. Later, it climbs steadily higher. The key detail is simple. These withdrawals are taxed as ordinary income, whether the retiree needs the cash for living expenses or not. For someone with a modest account, the RMD may not feel dramatic. For a couple with a 7-figure pre-tax balance, the story is different. A $1 million traditional IRA with an initial required withdrawal in the tens of thousands of dollars instantly creates a new income stream, even if the household already has a pension rental income, or part-time work. That extra income does not appear in isolation. It lands on top of everything else, pushing total taxable income higher. This is where the second trigger comes in. Social Security benefits in the United States are not automatically tax-free. The tax code uses a measure called combined income that adds together adjusted gross income, half of Social Security, and certain other items. Once combined income passes specific thresholds, up to half of the benefit becomes taxable. Cross a higher threshold and up to 85% of the benefit can be pulled into taxable income. A retiree who once expected Social Security to be a stable, after-tax foundation can discover that forced withdrawals from a 401k have turned a large share of that benefit into something the IRS now counts. The third trigger is quieter, but just as powerful. Medicare IRMAA, income-related adjustments to Medicare Part B and Part D premiums, creates a series of cliffs where even a modest increase in reported income can raise healthcare costs. When modified adjusted gross income creeps above certain brackets, monthly premiums jump. For a couple living on a carefully planned budget, discovering that forced RMDs have not only increased their tax bill, but also raised their healthcare premiums can feel like a double penalty for having saved diligently. Viewed together, these trigger points form a chain reaction. Traditional 401k and IRA balances lead to RMDs. RMDs help push combined income higher. Higher combined income makes more of Social Security taxable and can push modified adjusted gross income over IRMAA thresholds. A decision made decades earlier to favor pre-tax saving for an immediate deduction reappears in retirement as a tangle of tax and premium consequences. For many households, this is not just an abstract pattern. It is a lived experience. The letter from the plan custodian announcing RMDs, the tax preparer explaining why this year's bill is higher, the notice from Medicare showing a new larger premium, all of it against the backdrop of a balance that, from a distance, still looks like a success story. The natural question follows. What does this chain reaction look like in real lives, with real numbers and real couples who thought they were prepared? Until these rules all hit at once? It is one thing to talk about RMDs, Social Security tax, and IRMAA in the abstract. It is another to see what they do to real people. The retirement tax bomb is easiest to understand when it is attached to names, ages, and balances that look uncomfortably familiar. The first case is a married couple in their mid-60s. They spent 3 decades doing what every article told them to do. They maxed their traditional 401s, grabbed every employer match they could, and invested sensibly in broad index funds. By the time they stop working, their combined pre-tax balances are a little under $1.8 million. The house is paid off. They have a modest taxable brokerage account and some cash, but most of their net worth sits inside those tax-deferred plans. Their plan is simple. Delay Social Security to increase the monthly benefit. Live mostly off small withdrawals and their savings for a few years, then let Social Security and their investments carry them the rest of the way. On paper, it looks clean, but when they reach the age where required minimum distributions must begin, the math changes. The RMD on their combined accounts forces out tens of thousands of dollars in taxable income each year, whether they ask for it or not. That income stacks on top of their newly claimed Social Security. Suddenly, a large portion of those Social Security benefits becomes taxable. Their total income pushes them into a higher bracket than they expected, and their tax preparer has to explain why their bill is rising, even though their lifestyle has not. The second case shows how fragile the system can become after a loss. A widow in her early 70s inherits her late husband's individual retirement accounts. Together, their pre-tax balances had crossed the 7-figure line. While both were alive, they filed as a married couple, which gave them wider tax brackets. RMDs were still noticeable, but they were spread over joint income. After her husband dies, nothing in the RMD formula suddenly becomes gentler. The required withdrawals keep coming based on the size of the accounts and her life expectancy. What does change is her filing status. She is now a single filer with narrower brackets. The same level of pre-tax withdrawals pushes her into higher marginal rates more quickly. At the same time, she faces decisions about her own Social Security survivor benefits and must stay enrolled in Medicare. Her combined income, driven in large part by RMDs she cannot avoid, edges over thresholds that increase the share of Social Security subject to income tax. Higher modified adjusted gross income also pushes her into a higher IRMAA bracket, raising her Medicare premiums. From her perspective, nothing about her day-to-day life feels extravagant. She has not splurged on new houses or cars. Yet the system now treats her as if she is a much bigger spender, because the tax-deferred accounts are effectively paying her an involuntary salary. A third case reveals a different twist. A so-called frugal millionaire retires from a demanding career in his early 60s with roughly $1.2 million in traditional retirement accounts and a smaller Roth balance. He enjoys consulting work and decides to keep earning part-time income because it never hurts to have extra. At first, the arrangement feels ideal. His consulting income covers daily expenses. He delays touching his retirement accounts, proud that the balances are still growing. He waits to claim Social Security, aiming for a higher benefit later. When the age for RMDs arrives, he is still working part-time because he likes the structure and intellectual challenge. Now, the consulting fees, delayed Social Security, and forced RMDs all land on the same tax return. The additional income bumps more of his Social Security into the taxable column and nudges his modified adjusted gross income above a key IRMAA threshold. The result is higher taxes and higher Medicare premiums than he ever expected. The part-time work that once felt like a harmless bonus is now tangled with a series of thresholds that amplify its tax cost. In all three cases, the pattern is the same. The seven-figure IRA that once felt like a pure symbol of success becomes a lever the tax system pulls on its own schedule. What looked like a simple pile of money turns into a chain reaction. RMDs, benefit taxation, premium surcharges. None of these households did anything reckless. They followed the rules they were given. The problem is that the rules were explained in pieces, at different times, often without a clear picture of how they would collide in the same decade of life. If these outcomes are possible even for people who are careful and informed, it raises an unsettling question. Is this just bad luck for a few edge cases, or is it a structural feature of the way retirement saving has been designed? And if the problem is built into the system itself, what role did policy, industry, and conventional advice play in steering millions of savers into the same narrow path? The retirement tax bomb is not just the result of individual choices. It is the outcome of a system that, for decades, pushed savers in one direction without showing them the full map. Policymakers, employers, and the financial industry all had reasons to promote tax-deferred accounts. None of them had strong incentives to explain, in plain language, what those choices would mean at 70, 75, or 80. From a policy perspective, the motivation looks straightforward. In the late 20th century, governments wanted households to take more responsibility for their own retirement. Tax-deferred accounts were an elegant tool. Offer a deduction today. Let the money grow without annual taxation. Collect revenue later when people withdraw funds. On the government's balance sheet, this is a shift in timing. Tax receipts are lower during a worker's peak earning years, but expected to rise when those savings are eventually spent. The political message is easy to sell. We'll help you save by lowering your taxes now. Employers also found defined contribution plans attractive. Traditional pensions put long-term obligations on corporate books. A promise to pay a certain benefit for life is expensive and uncertain. A 401k, by contrast, is contained. The company's commitment is limited to administering the plan and matching contributions up to a formula. Investment risk and longevity risk move to the employee. Auto-enrollment and default contribution rates let companies claim they support retirement readiness, while defaulting workers into pre-tax saving that reduces payroll taxes and current income tax for the worker. The financial industry built an entire marketing ecosystem around accumulation. Commercials showed charts of balances climbing over time, workers smiling as they increased their contribution percentage, and phrases like, "Let your money grow, tax deferred." The focus was almost entirely on the journey up the mountain. Very few ads showed the other side of the slope. The descent, where withdrawals collide with tax rules, benefit formulas and healthcare premiums. Product menus in many employer plans made pre-tax contributions the default choice. Roth options, when available, were sometimes added later and rarely highlighted in the same way. Conventional advice completed the picture. Simple rules of thumb spread quickly. Always take the company match. Max your 401k if you can. You'll probably be in a lower tax bracket in retirement. These statements contain pieces of truth. The match is valuable. Saving aggressively is crucial. Some people do see lower taxable income after they stop working. But for high earners, big savers, and those who delay retirement or Social Security, the assumptions can fail. Their retirement income after RMDs, required withdrawals and benefit taxation, may look very similar to, or even higher than, their late career income. Planning tools and risk questionnaires often reinforce the focus on investment volatility rather than tax structure. Questionnaires asked how a person would feel if their portfolio dropped by 20%, not how they would feel if their effective marginal tax rate in their 70s climbed because of RMDs and IRMAA. Retirement calculators showed probability of not running out of money, but rarely displayed lifetime taxes under different contribution and withdrawal strategies. None of this was a conspiracy. Each part of the system pursued understandable goals: encourage saving, reduce pension risk for employers, grow assets under management, simplify advice for a broad audience. But the combined effect is clear. Millions of households were guided toward maximizing pre-tax balances with very little discussion about the tax sequencing problem that would arise later. The bomb was not hidden out of malice. It was hidden because the story of save more now and worry about taxes later was easier to tell than the more complicated story of how, when, and from which account you take money out will shape the tax reality of your 70s and 80s. If the structure itself helped create the trap, it is not enough to tell individuals to be more careful. The more useful question is what happens next. How does this U.S. model compare to the way other countries structure retirement income and taxation? And what are the personal and social consequences of discovering, late in life, that a carefully built nest egg comes with a tax schedule many people never fully understood? To see the shape of the U.S. retirement tax bomb more clearly, it helps to place it next to other systems. In many European countries, for example, a larger share of retirement income comes from state pensions that are funded through higher taxes during working years. Individuals may still have private savings, but the core promise is different. The government takes more up front and provides a more predictable benefit later. Taxes in retirement tend to be applied to those pensions in a more straightforward way, without as many moving parts tied to separate accounts, forced withdrawals, and hidden surcharges. Japan offers another contrast. Their public pension benefits and cultural expectations of family support play a larger role. Individual investment accounts exist, but many retirees rely more heavily on guaranteed payments and less on large, self-managed pools of capital. Taxation still matters, but the typical retiree is not juggling multiple layers of income thresholds that change the tax treatment of a separate national pension, healthcare premiums, and private account withdrawals all at once. By comparison, the U.S. model leans heavily on individual responsibility and market-based accounts. That approach has advantages. A disciplined saver can accumulate more control and, potentially, more wealth than in systems that rely entirely on state pensions. But the trade-off is complexity. A U.S. retiree with a seven-figure traditional IRA is not just managing investments. They are navigating a tax code where a decision to withdraw a bit more can trigger ripple effects: higher federal tax, a higher share of Social Security being taxed, and increased Medicare premiums through IRMAA. The personal consequences of this structure are not just about numbers on a return. They shape how people feel about their own success. Many retirees who see their tax bills and Medicare premiums rise after RMDs begin to describe a sense of being punished for saving. They did what they were told, contributed, deferred taxes, delayed gratification, built a large balance. When the system responds by taking a larger slice at the moment they hope to relax, it can breed frustration and mistrust. This frustration often leads to behavior that looks cautious on the surface, but comes with its own cost. Faced with rising taxable income from forced withdrawals, some retirees respond by cutting discretionary spending. They take fewer trips, delay home repairs, or limit help to family members to stay below tax and IRMAA thresholds. The idea of enjoying retirement becomes tangled with the fear of triggering a higher bracket. Instead of feeling free to design a life around their values, they design it around income lines drawn in the tax code. There is an emotional toll as well. The constant need to watch thresholds and adjust withdrawals reinforces a sense that the system is adversarial. Rather than celebrating a lifetime of work, retirees can feel like they have entered a second job, managing tax exposure. This can be especially heavy on widows and widowers who suddenly face narrower tax brackets and changes in benefits at the same time they are coping with loss. The widow's tax penalty, where the same RMDs push a single filer into higher rates, is not a term most people learn in their 40s. It often arrives as an unpleasant surprise in their 70s. At the social level, the reliance on large pre-tax balances as a future tax base creates a quiet tension. Governments project future revenue, assuming that RMDs and other withdrawals will be taxed under certain rules. Any major change to those rules can ripple through budgets. At the same time, as more retirees become aware of the tax costs, there is increasing pressure for relief or simplification. Policymakers must balance the need for revenue with the desire to avoid punishing those who saved aggressively under the rules they were given. Economically, the combination of tax complexity and perceived penalties can dampen spending among precisely the group that has significant wealth. Older households with large retirement balances often have the capacity to support local economies through travel, services, and consumption. When they feel forced to hold back to manage tax consequences, some of that potential demand never materializes. Capital continues to grow inside accounts, which is good for measured wealth, but the flow of that capital into the real economy is weaker than it could be. For younger generations watching this play out, the message is mixed. On one hand, they see that aggressive saving can lead to large account balances. On the other, they watch parents or grandparents struggle with a system that seems to penalize them for doing exactly what they were told. This can erode trust in retirement advice and in the promise that it will all be worth it later. If later looks like a maze of taxes and penalties, the motivation to follow the same path weakens. All of these consequences, personal frustration, cautious spending, policy tension, and generational skepticism, stem from the same core design. A retirement system that relies heavily on tax-deferred accounts without equally strong guidance on exit strategies creates winners who do not feel like winners. The question is not whether tax-deferred saving is inherently bad. It is whether the story is complete. And if the story so far has focused mostly on the journey up the mountain, what needs to change on the way down so that the descent is not defined by surprise tax bills and silent resentment? If the retirement tax bomb is the result of structure and timing, diffusing it is about regaining control over when income appears on the tax return and which dollars are used at different stages of life. The goal is not to avoid tax entirely. It is to prevent a situation where the largest tax bills show up precisely when work has stopped and flexibility feels lowest. That requires planning in layers before retirement, in the years just after leaving work, and even after RMDs begin. The first layer is the pre-retirement years, roughly the 50s to early 60s for many people. These are often peak earning years, but they are also when the structure of future retirement income is being locked in. Instead of blindly maxing pre-tax contributions every year, high earners and strong savers can begin to think in terms of tax diversification. That means balancing traditional 401k contributions with Roth contributions when available, especially if current tax rates are not dramatically higher than what they might face later. It can also mean directing some savings into taxable brokerage accounts, which provide long-term capital gains treatment and more flexible access. The key question shifts from, how do I pay the least tax this year, to what mix of accounts will give me the most control over taxes for the next 30 years? The second layer is the early retirement or pre-RMD window. For many, there is a gap between the moment regular work ends and the age when RMDs begin. During these years, earned income often drops significantly. That creates a rare opportunity, intentionally recognizing income at relatively low tax rates. One common tool is the Roth conversion, moving money from traditional IRAs to Roth accounts and paying tax now at a known rate. For someone who expects high RMDs later, using the lower brackets in these years to convert can reduce the size of future forced withdrawals. Coordinating this with Social Security timing is critical. Some households may delay claiming Social Security to keep reported income lower while they fill up lower tax brackets with conversions. Others may choose a different path. The central idea is that the years between work and RMD age are not just empty space. They are a planning window that can reshape the entire tax profile of later retirement. Once RMDs begin, options narrow, but they do not disappear. Retirees can still manage the impact of forced withdrawals through a combination of spending choices and targeted tools. Qualified charitable distributions, QCDs, where available, allow some or all of the RMD to be sent directly from an IRA to eligible charities, satisfying part of the RMD requirement without increasing adjusted gross income in the same way a normal withdrawal would. Coordinating withdrawals across taxable accounts, tax-deferred accounts, and Roth accounts can smooth income from year to year, helping to avoid sudden jumps that trigger IRMAA surcharges or push more of Social Security into the taxable column. Even modest adjustments, such as realizing some capital gains in years when RMDs are lower or spreading large expenses over multiple years, can help keep income inside preferred bands. Beyond individual tactics, there is a broader mindset shift that points toward the future. No one can predict with certainty what tax law will look like 20 or 30 years from now. Rates may rise, brackets may change, RMD rules may be adjusted. In that uncertainty, the most valuable asset is flexibility. Households that arrive at retirement with multiple types of accounts, tax-deferred, Roth, and taxable, have more levers to pull as the rules evolve. They can choose which dollars to use in response to changes, rather than being locked into a single, heavily taxed stream of forced income. There are signs that the conversation around retirement is moving in this direction. More advisors are integrating tax projections into their planning, not just portfolio growth assumptions. Some employer plans now highlight Roth options more prominently. Educational content is beginning to focus on decumulation strategies, not just accumulation slogans. As this awareness spreads, the hope is that fewer people will experience their 70s as a surprise tax project they never signed up for. Instead, they will see taxes as one variable in a plan that was designed, from the start, to balance immediate relief with long-term control. In the end, defusing the retirement tax bomb is not about fear. It is about clarity. It is the difference between stumbling into RMD age and saying no one told me this would happen, and arriving there with a map that shows in advance how each choice in the 40s, 50s, and 60s shapes the tax reality of the decades that follow. In the end, the retirement tax bomb is not a mystery. It is the predictable outcome of a deal that was only half explained. For decades, savers were shown the front of the contract. Contribute pre-tax, pay less today, let it grow. The back of the contract, the part where required minimum distributions collide with Social Security taxation and Medicare IRMAA, was rarely read out loud. The result is a generation of retirees who did exactly what they were told, only to discover in their 60s and 70s that their biggest tax bills may come after their last paycheck, not before. This is not a story about villains and victims. Tax-deferred accounts helped millions of people build wealth they might never have saved otherwise. Employers, policymakers, and advisors all pushed in that direction for reasons that made sense at the time. But a plan that focuses only on how much can I accumulate and never asks, how will this be taxed on the way out, is not a complete plan. A 7-figure 401k that triggers uncontrolled taxable income, higher Medicare premiums, and surprise bills is not the same as 7 figures of free and clear spending power. For anyone watching, the most important move is not panic, it is awareness. Look at your own balance sheet and ask, how much is in tax-deferred? How much is Roth? How much is taxable? Ask whether you have a strategy for the years between retirement and RMD age, not just for the years until you can stop working. Consider talking with a qualified planner who understands both investments and tax law, not just one or the other. If this episode helped you see your accounts in a different light, share it with someone who is 5 to 10 years from retirement and still has time to adjust. Leave a comment with the one tax question that worries you most about your own retirement, so we know where to go deeper next. And if you want more long-form breakdowns on Social Security timing, safe withdrawal strategies, and how to design a retirement that feels truly lived, not just funded, make sure to subscribe so you do not miss the next chapter of this conversation.